Shalom everybody and welcome back to Insights in the Parsha of the week, Parshat Devarim, which is also Shabbat Chazon, the eve of Tisha B'Av. May Hashem really console us with two items. Number one, that we should get back the light of the Tzaddikim, which is so concealed due to all the strife and controversy and difficulties between the Jewish people themselves. And we should have also the Beit HaMikdash built. We'll go into this idea a little bit, Bezat Hashem. But first, some insights in the Parsha. Parshat HaShavua, we take a look in chapter 1 of the Parshat Devarim. From verse, let's say it's verse 6, 7, sorry, verse Verse 9, 10, Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Jewish people, I couldn't handle you guys alone. Va'omar alechem, verse number 9. And I said to you, Ba'et hahi lemor, at that time, Lo chalevadi setetchem, I can't handle you Jewish people alone. I need help. I need other rabbis, other judges to help me with you. Those are the Sarei Alafim, Sarei Me'ot, Sarei Chamishim, Sarei Asarot. Rabbis for every 1,000, for every 10,000, 1,000, 100, 50, 10. So that's where you had help. And he's saying, why can't I handle you guys? Because in the next verse, number 10, Hashem Elokechem hirba etchem v'inechem hayom kechochvei hashamayim la'ov. Hashem, your Lord, has made you so abundant, not just in physical numbers, but also he made it difficult to judge you. Because any misjudgment, the punishment goes on the judges. So they have to be very careful to give the judgment properly. By the nations, it's not a problem. They make a mistake, so what? But by the Jewish judges, it's a tiny mistake. They get punished. Okay? But on the simple level, Moshe Rabbeinu is talking about how many there are. And Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't handle all the 600,000 men alone. And behold, you are today like the stars in the sky, being abundant, larov. Rashi says, meaning you're established like the day which shines, okay, and like the stars that shine. And then the verse 11, which is where we're going to, where now Moshe Rabbeinu blesses the Jewish people. Hashem Elokei Avotechem Yosef Alechem. After saying how big the Jewish people are, so Moshe Rabbeinu blesses them. Hashem Elokei Avotechem, the Lord of your ancestors, your forefathers, Yosef alechem kachem elef pa'amim. May he add upon you, like you are, another 1,000 times fold. Elef pa'amim. So it's not 1,000 times singular, but 1,000 times, because it says pa'amim. If it was singular, it would say elef pa'am, once 1,000. If it says pa'amim, so you learn out of the Midrash, this is a few thousand times Moshe Rabbeinu is blessing the Jewish people to become abundant. And it's amazing, there's a precision in the commentaries in the Midrash, that if you take the actual distance of the Jewish encampment in the desert, and you multiply it by 2,000, it becomes full circle of the entire globe. Amazing. The Jewish encampment that was in the desert, times 2,000 of that, it goes around the entire globe totally. So that was and a precision in Moshe Rabbeinu's blessing, elef pa'amim, twice 1,000, and then vivarech etchem, and may Hashem bless you, Kasher diber lachem, like he spoke to you. Let's take a look at the Rashi, and then we have an insight based on Rebbe Nachman's teachings. So Rashi says on the words Yosef alechem kachem elef pa'amim. May Hashem add upon you like you are, and like you are meaning the Midrash is your quality, not necessarily the amount, but also kachem meaning also like you guys are of good stature. May Hashem add more Jews of stature similar to you. Like in other words, in midot and attributes, in standing, on religious level. So Rashi says, Mahu shuv, he asks a common question. What are you adding a second bracha, Moshe Rabbeinu? Mahu shuv yivarech etchem kasher diber lechem. Why after blessing them does he say, and may Hashem bless you like he spoke to you? What is that blessing? And what are you adding here? You just give him a blessing. So why are you saying, and may Hashem bless you? Where's that going to? So he explains, Ella Amrulo. So rather, this like Rashi is quoting the Midrash. The Jews said to the Jewish people, Moshe, Ata noten kitzva lebirchatenu. are you giving a limitation to our blessings? Because you're saying Hashem should make you like 1,000 times or 2,000 times more than you are. So technically, that's a limitation compared to the blessing that the Jews had already received from Hashem. Right? Moshe ata noten kitza lebirchatenu, kvar hivtiach HaKadosh Baruch Hu et Avraham. Already Hashem promised, the Lord blessed be, the Holy One blessed be, already promised to Avraham, Asher im yuchal ish limnot v'chule. It's a blessing found in Genesis chapter 13, verse 16, where Hashem blessed Avraham Avinu, his offspring. And he said, if a man can count, the stars in heaven, and also there's the sand, so too they can count your offspring. And Rashi says, just as it's impossible to count how many stars there are out there, because there's so many stars, and how many grains of sand there are on the shore, it's impossible to count, so too will be your offspring, which is like an limitless amount. You can't count. So compared to your blessing, Moshe Rabbeinu, compared to that blessing, your blessing, Moshe Rabbeinu, is very limited. Only 1,000 or 2,000. Okay? So he says, Amar lehem, Moshe Rabbeinu answered the Jewish people, Zo mishelihi. This blessing that I'm saying, Yosef alechem kachem elef pamim, that Hashem should add on to you as you are another 1,000 or 1,000 times. Okay? That's my personal blessing to you, the Jewish people. Avalu meban Hashem, blessed be Yivarchetchem kasher debelechem. May He bless you like He already blessed you. Okay, so the question, even the commentaries asks, so 1 second, Moshe Rabbeinu, if Hashem's blessing is endless, what are you coming to add? If the blessing is kasher Yivarchetchem kasher debelechem, which is a blessing of Avraham Avinu, that it will be impossible to count your offspring, that's how many there'll be. So why, Moshe Rabbeinu, you're adding another blessing and it's a limitation? And you're adding a blessing to something which is unlimited, and the blessing you're adding has a limitation to it. What are you adding? You're making it like a decrease, God forbid. Okay? We can understand this based on what Rebbe Nachman talks about in Likutey Moharan lesson 24. Rebbe Nachman says that there exists, he's quoting the Zohar, obviously, in the Arizal, there's Hashem's infinite light. Hashem's infinite kindness and light, which is infinite, okay? And Hashem wants us to access this infinite light in order to shine His kindness and His benevolence to the world. Hashem created the world in order that His goodness should be made known. So Hashem does want us to tap into His infinite light. The problem is, being physical human beings with finite existence, it seems to be impossible and totally opposite for a finite being to tap into something which is infinite. Because if they merge together, their finite existence will be merged in the infinite, it'll disappear. And Hashem doesn't want this. Hashem wants, as still a finite existence, to shine into this finite universe His infinite light. But how do you do that? It's two opposites. So there's what's called this wall, we've mentioned this many times, this wall is called in the Kabbalah the Keter, which means a crown. A crown, just like it's a boundary around the head of the king, so too the Keter is a boundary separating mankind to Hashem's infinite light. And when a person now is running to advance in order to attain the perception of the infinite light, which will bring down to him a lot of bounty and blessing and happiness and salvation in many areas that he's suffering terrible constrictions and difficulties. Okay, so the Keter, when the Keter sees its job as a wall, as a partition, is in order to prevent people from overdoing it, going overboard. So whenever somebody's mind, the perception is reaching up, they hit the Keter bounces them back. And in the bounce back, catching them off guard, that's when the light of the infinite light is shined into them. Okay? Now, because it's a perception beyond the reach, the Keter, Rebbe Nachman calls also the Keter another name. It's called Pele. Pele means something wondrous. Wondrous means something which is beyond your grasp. Okay? So the Pele is something wondrous, because in this case, the Keter's job is to allow access in a certain way, that light which is beyond, which is wondrous. It's a wondrous light beyond the person's capacity. In the bounce back, depending how the person takes the bounce back, besimcha and emunah, etc., and with yearning and desire to come back to Hashem, that's how He builds vessels and these vessels are filled with this light, and then he can utilize this light in his life, in his daily living, so that a finite and infinite concepts can join together at the same time, simultaneously. Okay, so there's a point made that the Zohar mentions this, that the Keter is called Pele, and the letters of Pele backwards are Aleph, Aleph Lamed Pei, which is also read, can be also read as elef, which means 1,000. Elef and Aleph. The idea of Aleph means it's the first, because when Hashem created the universe, the first stage in the creation was the Keter, believe it or not. The first level in all of the creation, in the vacated space that Hashem created in the beginning of creation, the first level was from the Keter, the levels in the Keter, of course, and from that came forth the rest of the creation of the universe. So that's why it's called elef, Aleph. The Keter is called Aleph because it's now the initial stage, like number one. The letter Aleph is the number one. But it's also 1,000 because the unit 1,000 is considered something which has like substantial meaning and value, and it's considered something which gets priority. When you say $1,000, 1,000 shkalim, 1,000 this, 1,000, tens, hundreds, okay, it's wishy-washy still. When you hear 1,000, the eyes begin to pop open. Oh, 1,000, okay, that's something big. It gains stature in people's lives. There's much more depth, obviously, to this, but on a simple level, that's a connection between Aleph and Elef, okay? Now, Rav Nosson explains, not every Jew can successfully access the light of the Keter and the light of the Keter. Because most people, when they get pushed back, they get so crashed, they get so broken, they get so miserable and sad and depressed that they don't pass the test. They can't handle it. They're so torn apart by the frustration and being broken. I'm trying so much to be a good Jew, to come close to Hashem, and you push me back. And they forget that it's a test because they're so overwhelmed by the difficulties of the challenge. So most people, they just crash. They don't hold on. They don't have enough simcha. Rebbe Nachman teaches you need simcha in order that when you get bounced back by the Keter, to be able to handle it, so you can get the rewards. You can reap the rewards afterwards. The average person has difficulty. So Rav Nosson writes, then who's this for? This challenge of the Keter, infinite light, etc., is the main people who access this properly, completely, are the Tzaddikim. That's why the Tzaddikim. The reason why the Tzaddikim is because they know to handle the setbacks. Like the verse reads in Proverbs, Sheva Tzaddik, Sheva Yipol Tzaddik Vakam. A Tzaddik in Proverbs said, he falls 7 times, which means 7 times 7, like sevenfold times and times a lot. It's not just 7. He falls 7, but he keeps on getting up. Sheva Yipol Tzaddik Vakam. We have a joke in Breslov, by the way, that Breslov Hasidim drink 7-Up. Because 7-Up is this verse. The tzaddik falls 7 and he gets up. 7-Up. Going back to being serious. So this is the job of the tzaddikim. They maximize this. They know how to handle the setbacks because there are always people trying to serve Hashem b'simcha, like Yosef HaTzadik, for example, who even though in Egypt and in the jail and in the dungeons and being tested, Potiphar's wife and everything, he was happy. And even though he was taken from his father for so many years, he was able to hold on being happy, and that's why he found grace and charm in everybody's eyes. Everybody liked him. Everybody liked Yosef HaTzadik because he was always happy. He was able not to be broken by the situation. And it hurts. There's the time to express Hashem, I just want to come back to you and I come close to you. But chas v'shalom that they fall to sadness and depression. They didn't do that to Tzaddikim. They use the situation to express what's inside. And once what's been inside is expressed, they can say, whew, now I can get back to doing what I have to do and being happy and starting again in life. That's a tzaddikim, okay? So being that the case, the tzaddikim, they're the ones who master the access to the Keter, which is the elef. So Moshe Rabbeinu, going back to this verse here, there's Hashem's blessing, Vivarech etchem kasher dibirachem. Right? Like Rashi says, the Moshe said to the Jewish people, I'm not taking away from Hashem's blessing. His blessing is unlimited, like he said to Avraham Avinu, like the sand on the shore, like the stars, it's unlimited. So that's your blessing from Hashem. The problem is, with such an unlimited blessing, you can't access it. You can't access it because you're a finite existence. You try to access Hashem's unlimited blessings. It's not just like you should become unlimited people, but the blessing itself is accessing unlimited access of blessing, of bounty. Okay? Now that is a problem. Because why? You don't have the vessels for that. When you try to merge with something which is unlimited, the normal attitude of person is they overexplode from overload from too much light and too much intensity. So what's needed is a barrier, is the Keter. So Moshe Rabbeinu is adding his blessing, which will be the key to receive Hashem's blessing. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Me Hashem Yosef alechem kachem elef pa'amim." May Hashem add upon you like you are kachem 1,000 times. Elef is the letters backwards pele, which is the Keter. May He bless you with the Keter elef pa'amim times every time you need to access, as many times as it takes, but you access the Keter. That's my blessing to you. Because as a tzaddik, Moshe Rabbeinu reached already the Keter, and he knows how to handle the setbacks like every other tzaddik. But now the Jewish people who are miskenim, poor people, they don't know how to handle it. Too much light, they'll overload. And how do I get to this? So Moshe Rabbeinu is giving of his experience as like a pre gift to the Jewish people to access their blessing. Okay, this is the gift that Moshe Rabbeinu got, that because of his own struggle and earning it. But the other average Jewish people, they don't have that. They can't access infinite blessings because they don't have the capacity to handle the Keter. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he's able to give that to the Jewish people. In his wording, he says the name of Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef alechem kachem is like giving the power of Yosef HaTzadik who sticks out. Moshe Rabbeinu is mentioning Yosef because Yosef HaTzadik was a master of being besimcha, and he's called Yosef HaTzadik. He is the epitome of a tzaddik. Moshe Rabbeinu is accessing that and now giving that to the Jewish people. So he's saying Yosef alechem kachem elef pa'amim, and as a result of this, vivarech etchem kasher diber lachem. Wow. So with this in mind, Rav Nosson, he explains about the mourning that we're actually mourning in these 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av. We're mourning 2 items. Number 1, what's called the death. We mentioned this before, earlier. Death and the concealment of the Tzaddikim. The Midrash says that the death of the Tzaddikim is kiflaim, twice as destructive and painful and hurting and whatever you want to call it, dark, as more than the destruction of the temple. There's the destruction of the holy temple, which you can imagine what could be more than that. And the Midrash says that the death and concealment of the tzaddikim is kiflaim, is even twice as severe as the destruction of the temple. Okay, in line with this, that the Keter is called twice. He said there's 1,000 and another 1,000, and that was, we said elef pa'amim. How the Keter works, by the way, is that it shines a light all the way down and then goes back up. That makes the number 20. Okay, so 20 is like double of 10. 10 of the 10 sfirot, it's considered doubled. And the tzaddikim, they bring down their light of their Keter down all the way to the lowest Jews who are down, but then they go back up. After enlightening all the Jews, they go back up. So in that sense, the death of the tzaddikim is considered twice, because it's a double whammy. It's not accessing them, that they have to go all the way down and come back up, so we lose out the doubleness of the koch of the tzaddikim to reach out and to help us. And he explains, Rav Nosson, just in more detail, that the job of the tzaddikim, who represent Yosef HaTzadik, are to enhance the Jewish people with enthusiasm to be happy in the exile. Okay? And the verse reads that V'haya Beit Yaakov le'esh, u Beit Yosef le'le'ava, u Beit Esav le'kash. It's a verse from the prophets that the house of Jacob is considered a fire, the fire of the Torah. Right, Torah emet, and Moshe Titen emet leYaakov, give truth to Yaakov. Yaakov is truth. Truth is the Torah. The light of the Torah, the fire of the Torah is Yaakov. Yosef is the flame. He uses the Torah to inflame and wake up the Jews from becoming, lethargy and not moving around and depressed and sad and heavy. To say, Yalla, Jewish people, wake up, come on, and be happy and enthusiastic and encouraged. That's the idea of Yosef. And that's enough already to burn Esav, which is the exile that we're in now, the final exile of Edom, which is under Esav, the descendants of Esav. Okay? So Rav Nosson explains that Yosef HaTzadik represents the fire to inflame the Jewish people. The problem is that without a Beit HaMikdash as a vessel, the tzaddikim can inflame Jewish people and lift them up. But the problem is, after lifting them up, they crash again. You have many times that a person comes to a tzaddik, he's really aroused, or he learns teachings of tzaddikim, he's on a high, and then afterwards he crashes. Why is that happening? Why isn't there enough to sustain? It's one thing that tzaddikim give light, okay, you help them, you boost them, but again, to go back up and then to go back down again, and then up and down, and not to be able to stay up, you know what's going on? What does that do to Rebbe Nachman says? The concept of binyamin. Binyamin represents the Beit HaMikdash, because in his portion was built the actual holy of holies of the temple. That's why Yosef, when he finally saw Binyamin, after never seeing him, because he was already, he was taken away when Binyamin was just born. So he cried on his tzavarav. The verse reads in Parshat Vayigash that when Yosef finally saw Binyamin in Egypt, that he cried on his necks, both sides. So Rashi explains what are the two sides of the necks: the first temple and the second temple, because the Beit HaMikdash was built in the portion of Binyamin. Okay, and what is the temple? Rebbe Nachman explains that the temple is divided in sections, rooms called hechalot. Hechal, it has in it the root kli, it's a vessel. What's the idea of the vessel of the Beit HaMikdash? When the tzaddikim shine light of joy to the Jewish people, the Beit HaMikdash is there to be able to give capacity to receive this light and not crash. One of the reasons why we crash after being lifted up by the tzaddikim and then we have a fall is because the tzaddikim are accessing the joy through the infinite light. So it's a high level of joy coming down that they're trying to give to help the Jewish people wake up from the lowest of the low to anyone above that. But everyone is accessing a light from a high level of joy. The problem is we don't have the capacity to handle even that. So we go up, we get lifted up, the tzaddikim help us, but then we crash. Why? Because there's no Beit HaMikdash. If there was a Beit HaMikdash, it would allow for when the tzaddikim access the light, infinite light with the infinite joy, that the world can handle it in a way that they won't crash afterwards. So this, Rebbe Nachman explains, shows how the tzaddikim and the Beit HaMikdash work hand in hand. And we mourn both of them. We cry over the concealment of the tzaddikim, that we don't have the tzaddikim to enlighten us, because due to the darkness of the world. And we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, that even when the tzaddikim enlighten us, we crash because we don't have vessels to receive that light. So we mourn over both of them. We need both of them, and they both work hand in hand. This is what we're crying over on Tisha B'Av. The destruction of the temple, and also hand in hand the concealment of the tzaddikim, who can't shine us this light because of the darkness, because of the strife and all the problems. And when we cry about it, the crying expresses the yearning. When we cry over Hashem, I'm so far from the tzaddikim. I'm so far from being a tzaddik. I'm so far from following their advice. I'm so far from just, being lifted up and starting again. I'm so far from this. And on top of that, I'm far. There's no Beit HaMikdash to help me to have manageable vessels in myself to receive this light. So I'm crying over both of them. When we do cry over both of them, like the Gemara says, Zocheh lirot bebinyana, you merit to see the building of the Beit HaMikdash. You merit to see also the light of the Tzaddikim. Rebbe Nachman writes this beautifully in his prayer 33 of part 2 of Likutey Tfilot, that the only way to have revealed to a person the light of the Tzaddikim, when there's so much darkness, and also when there's such confusion and frustration of who's a tzaddik and who's not a tzaddik, who's a charlatan, and who's mixed of both, who's an admixture, and I don't know what to do. So Rebbe Nachman says the only advice is to get up at midnight, or during these 3 weeks, every day at noon, and by extension on the whole day of Tisha B'Av, or at least the morning part, to cry and mourn over this concealment. And by doing that, we should be zocheh to have a big revelation of, number one, the light of the tzaddikim, and the Beit HaMikdash to contain that light, so we can not crash after having a boost and an uplifting experience of simcha in life. Shabbat Shalom, and may Hashem console us and place pe'er tachat efer, splendor and glory instead of the ashes. Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach.